The only African-American Republican in the House of Representatives says he's done with Congress. Texas Congressman Hurd announced he would not seek re-election Thursday. Hillary Clinton narrowly won his district in 2016. Hurd has been critical of the president since then. Last month, Hurd told CBS News Mr. Trump's comments about 4 freshman progressives, who are all women of color, were racist and xenophobic. The president had this to say about the congressman and their disagreements on Friday.
Well, I hear he's done a good job. I don't know Congressman Hurd, but I've heard he's done a good job. We differ on certain subjects, but I've heard he's actually done a good job. It's too bad he's leaving, but we really don't know him.
And in the last 2 weeks, 6 House Republicans have announced plans to retire. Lawmakers typically wait until after the August or holiday recesses to make that decision. All right, joining me now is Danny Weiss and Leslie Sanchez. Danny is the former chief of staff for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and senior fellow at the Century Foundation. And Leslie Sanchez is a CBS News political contributor and Republican strategist. Thanks for joining us, guys. Leslie, I want to toss it to you first. You used to work in Congressman Hurd's district. Congressman Hurd won his Texas seat by fewer than 1,000 votes. Should Republicans be concerned with this wave of retirements, especially in some of these critical states ahead of the 2020 election?
Sure, it's a great question. Some of those retirements were expected, not only because of term limits, but also it's just not as much fun to be in the Congress when you're the minority party. So that's kind of the political reality. But Congressman Hurd's district, Texas 23, is really interesting. It's a toss-up district. It has been extremely competitive. It's flipped 5 times since 1990, and it's also the largest portion representing the Texas-Mexico border. So you need a really dynamic leader there. It's a big loss for the Republican Party, not only because of his kind of leadership. I mean, he was somebody who was just on the cover of Texas Monthly Magazine, being somebody who defied liberals and Donald Trump. He's truly been someone who could be an independent thinker, though a conservative. And I think it's a big loss for the GOP. He's the model the GOP should really be looking for future candidates.
And Texas really shaping up to be a battleground state as we head into 2020. Now, this week, the Republican National Committee spokeswoman appeared on Red and Blue. My colleague Tanya Rivero asked Liz Harrington about this wave of departures. Let's take a listen.
I think we're going to have a very good chance about taking the House back because the Democrats have really gone down a path that's very radical and too radical for these moderate swing districts that they won in 2018. So I think we're very optimistic. We see Democrats haven't delivered in the House, and meanwhile the president and the Trump administration continues to deliver.
Would you like
Now, Danny, I want to toss it over to you. We've also seen the president use this line of attack, calling Democrats, quote, radical. When we're discussing down ballot races, how can we expect the party to hit back on this criticism?
Well, thanks for that question. The Democrats are going into this cycle with a very clear message, similar to the one that they used in the 2018 election: lower health costs, higher pay, and cleaner government. Those issues resonated extremely well, as we can see with Democrats having taken over the majority. This wave of retirements is a very clear signal that Republicans don't think that they're going to win this election. And the loss of Congressman Hurd, who is a very well-respected member of Congress, is a big blow to them. The president will say anything about anyone, regardless of it being true, calling people radical, calling them whatever he wants. The fact is that the House has an agenda that they've been working on that speak to economic issues and critical kitchen table issues. He has said he wants to work on those with them. That hasn't really come out to be true.
Now, Alabama Congresswoman Martha Roby announced her retirement this week. Earlier this summer, Indiana Congresswoman Susan Brooks also said she was stepping down. And Brooks leads recruitment efforts for the House Republicans' campaign arm. Now, Leslie, back over to you. How critical is it for Republicans to court women candidates ahead of 2020?
Let me tell you, that is one of the biggest, that's the Achilles heel of the Republican Party. And that not in the ability to get women's votes and even suburban women, but to recruit qualified women to run for office. It used to be the threshold was that $100,000 to run for a congressional seat. You can raise the money. They would take you seriously at the campaign committees. But for a few election cycles now, there has not been as an aggressive effort to train, recruit, inspire. Some of that you could say could be the top of the ticket. Some of it could say it's it's a hostile environment, and the party's going through kind of this conflict of conscience, trying to find out what kind of Republican you want to be. Whatever it may be, there are many qualified conservative women who really should be looking to toss their hat in the ring. And I would think, if anything, the Democrats have a very strong advantage there. They showed it in the last election cycle, and it's something that the Republicans certainly need to put more pressure to get that done internally.
Now, speaking of Democrats on the other side of the aisle, they're also dealing with departures. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee announced a leadership shakeup this week. It came after an uproar about the lack of diversity among their senior ranks. Now, Danny, back over to you. How could this impact candidate recruitment on the Democratic side?
Well, it's true. Earlier this week, a number of staff left the DCCC. There have been complaints about not enough diversity at the top leadership. I think that Chairwoman Cheri Bustos is taking that very seriously. She has taken responsibility for some of the things that have taken place at the DCCC, and there is a council now together that is going to be looking at recruiting top flight and a diverse cast of staff. I would just have to say, if I had to choose between losing staff and losing members of Congress, I would take the loss of the staff and know that we're going to get good people back in place. The message that Chairwoman Bustos is taking is she needs to do a better job of the way she runs the DCCC, but at the same time, they just announced the best off-year July fundraising month ever. They raised $61 million in the first 6 months of this off year, the best first 6 months of any off year ever. So on the one hand, they're having to deal with the diversity issue at the staff leadership, and that's very important, and they are dealing with it, and I think they're now taking it very seriously. But at the same time, they're having a gangbuster fundraising period. That doesn't speak to everything that's going on, but it's a very good sign of how things are going.
Now, of course, Leslie, jump in.
I don't want to be the one to discount staff because I think we build this from the ground up. And I would say that's a Republican and a Democratic problem. I mean, the hypocrisy is thick there in trying to be the party of diversity. And then you have a lot of staff who tend to leave because of those principles. On the Republican side, it's a different thing because there's been an internal battle. You have some that are really committed to the idea and others who follow kind of party structure, get in line, and if it's not your turn, you're just going to have to wait. I think social media and technology have changed that, where more people can get involved in politics. But if you want more women and you want more diversity, then you have to create those avenues where they can be successful. And I don't buy it that staff, is second tier in that. I think they're the infrastructure to whether or not you have good governance once you get elected.
And as we know, reaching that equality for women in the workplace has certainly been a topic of discussion for some time now. Though we'd be remiss not to talk about the presidential race in this political wrap-up. The Democratic candidates debated in Detroit this week, as both of you know. Former Vice President Joe Biden said he expected to be a target on the stage. He just didn't know his former running mate would be too. Let's take a listen.
I must tell you, I was a little surprised at how much their incoming was about Barack. Look, this is 3 years later. The world has changed. President Trump has turned it upside down internationally. He has turned it upside down economically. People are hurting badly. There's no response. We faced a different problem 10 years ago when the economy collapsed because of Republican policy.
Now, a recent CBS News poll found 58% of Democrats approve of Obama's presidency. Danny, I want to turn it over to you. Could this fact hurt those candidates who went after Biden on his Obama administration run?
Well, I would certainly advise against attacking President Obama. You're absolutely right that he remains incredibly popular. And more importantly, he's not the issue. The issue is President Trump. Every presidential election for a sitting president is a referendum on that president. This is going to be a referendum on President Trump, on his racism, on his failure to deliver on his promises to working people in the Midwest, on his attempts to take away health care from people with the Affordable Care Act, the lawsuit that he's behind in Texas, to take away health care from people, to take away their right to access to care when they have pre-existing conditions. This will be a referendum on him. I would discourage candidates running for president from taking on President Obama, even if they have legitimate disagreements with things that he did. He is not on the ballot. President Trump is.
And of course, that's been a common line with Democratic strategists saying that the Democratic Party should go after Trump, and that should be the unifying message. Now, Leslie, over to you. Did the Democratic Party emerge with any unifying message out of these debates?
I think you saw the tale of two parties in there, and that's an internal struggle. But I would say from the Republicans' perspective, there were some immediate ads and immediate messages that were takeaways. And part of that was this open borders concept, the decriminalization of individuals who've come across the border, the idea of Medicare for all, and even Joe Biden talking about the unrealistic expectations on how to pay for that. This 10-year goal that's set by some of the other candidates is just not realistic, especially for someone who was in the trenches during the Obamacare fight. So whether or not the party chooses to move to the extreme left is going to make it a very good contrast next year when you're looking at the president. You're exactly right. Whoever comes out of the Democratic nomination is really going to be, when we finally see the true test of mano a mano, who's, a matchup on ideas and values. People may not like Trump. It's not going to be about likability. It's going to be probably more about style and who they feel can get the country going and keep the country going economically. And
lots of politics to go. Now, the issue of impeachment came up during the debates. By our count, there are now 118 House Democrats in favor of opening an inquiry. Danny, your former boss, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, has repeatedly warned against proceedings. How is Democratic leadership responding to these most recent calls?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it is significant that you've crossed this 50% threshold with the Democratic caucus, but you're still at a minority in the whole House. So if an issue were to come up for impeachment for a vote, all the Republicans would vote against impeachment, and you still don't have a majority of the Democrats. So it's quite possible that it would not pass, as happened with the impeachment articles that Congressman Green brought up, and those were defeated recently on the House floor. The Speaker's approach, I think, is going to remain the same for the time being. We'll have to see. She's very good at adjusting as she needs to. What she is saying is the House committees, 6 committees, are conducting very significant investigations and at the same time are bringing several lawsuits forward in the courts. They are trying still to get White House counsel McGahn to adhere to the subpoena and appear. They're trying to get the grand jury testimony from the Mueller investigation. The Mazar case, I could go down the list. There's a number of investigations, and they are continuing to investigate in the committee. So I think her strategy is going to continue the way it has, which is to say that members should do what they feel they need to do in terms of their districts and their politics. But at the same time, she does believe that unless there's an overwhelming majority of the Congress and of the American people for impeachment, it is not the best strategy at this time.
And we'll just have to see how that all shakes out. Finally, we'll end on a question we do every Friday. Leslie, who had a big week and who had a bad week?
Big week, Marianne Williamson. If you're looking at it, we're talking about the Democratic debates here. I mean, that was the #1 trending kind of Twitter, and it was very big on Google searches. But not only because of how unorthodox a candidate she is, but she really added some different context to the debate. And in many ways, she framed the issues unlike a traditional politician. And for many, that was really refreshing. How her perspective. She doesn't look like somebody who's going to ascend to the nomination, but she certainly added that different value, and I think a lot of people respect that. For bad week, I would say Senator Gillibrand. She's somebody who really fell flat. She was always kind of somebody who's going to be coronated into that higher role. She was really seen, and is still seen, as a very strong female leader on the Democratic side. But on this platform against these candidates, she just doesn't have all of the elements together to mount a national campaign.
So many candidates it must be a struggle to stand out for some people. Danny, what do you think? Who had a good week, who had a bad week?
Well, I would just say about Marianne Williamson that one thing I'd like to know is what is her accent? I still keep trying to figure that out. But she is a very interesting character to watch. There's no question about it. And I would say she did well. I think Senator Cory Booker had an excellent night. Partly I say that because I thought he demonstrated hope and positiveness compared with the other candidates on the stage. There were certainly times when he was on the attack. Some of that I don't think looked so good, but he smiled. He seemed hopeful. He seemed to really care about the future of the country, and I think he had a better night than he did in the June debate. I don't think Senator Harris did as well this time as she did in the previous debate. She got a clear boost when she went on the attack against Vice President Biden in June, and this time she came under attack herself, and I think it's generally accepted that she did not handle that quite as well as she might have.
Well, it's certainly shaping up to be an interesting race, that's for sure. Leslie Sanchez and Danny Weiss, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.